Farah, I'm Wallace Chapman.
Thank you.
Lisa Owen at Checkpoint next. Back tomorrow at 3:45.
Te whakarunga mai koe ki te rerangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere ake nei, thousands of people have been forced to evacuate as Greater Sydney is soaked with relentless torrential rain. And there's more to come. We cross live to some of the worst hit areas. Winter blues is an understatement. Flu cases and forecasts of a second wave of COVID bigger than the first. Over it much? Well, don't worry, we'll have what you need to know. How COVID highlighted another pandemic in a small BOP town, Meth, and what's being done to stop it. We check in on the Prime Minister's trip to Oz and the bank offering low interest green to go green. Solar panels, insulation, double glazing, EVs, rainwater tanks, etc. So what's the catch?
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon. I'm Anna Thomas. Workplaces are feeling the pressure of rising COVID-19 cases with more staff falling sick. There are 6,498 new cases today. The 7-day rolling average is 1,900 more than last Monday. Hayes Recruitment Agency Managing Director Adam Shapley says most businesses are trying to get by with whatever staff they have. He says the key difference this year is that the last 2 winters were in more controlled pandemic environments.
There's already a shortage of people in the workforce. So most organisations are probably running at a highest need for staff than they have been for many years. And this is just adding a further complication into what is already a challenging situation.
Health officials say that a winter wave of cases had been expected. The Prime Minister is playing down any expectation of a breakthrough this week on a long-simmering Trans-Tasman tension, Australia's 501 deportation policy. Jacinda Ardern is in Melbourne for her second trip to Australia this year and will meet her counterpart, Anthony Albanese, later this week. At their first meeting last month, Mr Albanese committed to having another look at the practice of deporting criminals to New Zealand, even if they've spent most of their life in Australia. Ms Ardern says the dispute is not necessarily simple to resolve.
Just being realistic about how some of those changes will take a bit of time to work through. But what I'm looking for is signs that we continue to be heard and that progress is being made.
Jacinda Ardern will return home to New Zealand on Friday. Australia's Minister for Emergency Management has called for climate change to be taken more seriously following the latest floods affecting New South Wales. Murray Watt has pointed to the increased regularity of weather crises and says there's a need for greater investment in disaster mitigation schemes. There's been a break in the rain, but meteorologists say it's expected to return later today. Regional water authorities say all major dams in the Sydney network are overflowing. Evacuation orders have affected around 30,000 people. Restaurant owners are criticising the Immigration Minister for suggesting they should offer better pay and working conditions to attract staff. The comments follows months of labour shortages that are causing businesses to cut back their opening hours. In Queenstown, Flame Bar and Grill owner Lou McDowell says she's frustrated by Michael Woods' comments.
He's got absolutely no idea. I mean, how can you make better working conditions and offer more pay when there's no one actually applying for the jobs? You know, the problem is supply. There is just no staff. So you could offer someone $50 an hour and they're still not going to turn up for a job interview because there's no one to turn up.
Lou McDowell's business offers $27 an hour for an entry-level server, along with staff meals and counselling support. She says she spent about $2,000 a month on Seek trying to attract more staff. New guidelines on what a low earthquake score for a building means has been made public more quickly than planned. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment's guidelines urge building owners and tenants not to rush to get out of buildings with low new building standard scores. The Ministry's Dr Dave Gittings says a low score is not the sole determinant of whether to stay or leave a building. The Health and Disability Commissioner has found that a psychiatrist failed to warn a patient that her medication could cause birth defects. The Commissioner says the incident is a reminder of the importance of informed consent. Felix Walton has more.
The woman became pregnant while taking the drug Epilim to treat a mood disorder. But the drug is known to greatly increase the risk of complications at birth and during a baby's development. Deputy Commissioner Rose Wall says the woman was not warned by her psychiatrist and wasn't offered any alternative drug. Ms. Wall also found the psychiatrist breached the Code of Consumers' Rights. The woman says her child is generally well, but has some features she suspects are related to the medication.
To sport now, and All Blacks first five Beauden Barrett expects the Irish to bounce back after their 42-19 loss at Eden Park. Barrett says the All Blacks are expecting a bruising encounter in the second test in Dunedin on Saturday.
I'd expect them to bounce back. They've such a proud side, and they'll raise their intent again this week, because I guess it is do or die. The series is on the line this weekend, and we know that they're coming, and we also need to rise as well.
The Silver Ferns coach, Dame Nolene Taurua, is happy her side will meet a couple of Australian players when they compete in next week's Cadbury series. The Ferns are playing the New Zealand men, the NZA side and an individual mixed side as preparation for the Commonwealth Games. Two former Australian Diamonds mid-quarters are named in the mixed sides, and Dame Nolene says they'll give the Silver Ferns a taste of what they'll get in Birmingham.
For us, it's for our mid-court, it's being able to combat or get used to that style of the Aussie way, the speed definitely of the ball, but also the movement.
And the series kicks off on July the 13th in Auckland. And New Zealand driver Scott McLaughlin concedes there was an element of relief as well as joy at winning his second career IndyCars race. McLaughlin, who started second on the grid at the Mid-Ohio track, took the lead following an early yellow flag and never gave it up. Swede Marcus Ericsson leads the championship with fellow New Zealander Scott Dixon 6th and McLaughlin 7th. And that's the news.
Prison labour.
Really what's happening is you're getting a bunch of prisoners digging their own graves, building the next cycle of failure.
Aussie floods.
There's no room for the water to remain in the dams. They are starting to spill. The rivers are flowing very fast and very dangerous.
And singing to your cows.
I'll call the cows home in my own distinct way.
Bringing it home, Morning Report, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight. Tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Taupo and Bay of Plenty. Fine, with increasing high cloud today. Cloud tomorrow with isolated showers, turning to rain in Taranaki and Northland in the morning and elsewhere later, with some heavy falls possible. In the west, from Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape, fine today. Scattered showers developing tomorrow morning, turning to rain in the afternoon, some possibly heavy later. Gisborne to Wairadapa, fine. Scattered rain developing tomorrow afternoon. Westland, Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, fine. Cloud increasing tomorrow with rain in Bulla and Westland, spreading elsewhere in the afternoon, then clearing everywhere in the evening. Canterbury, fine. Increasing high cloud tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers in Fiordland, mainly fine in Otago and Southland, apart from a few evening showers tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, fine today. A few showers later tomorrow. RNZ National, it is 5:07 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Nā mihi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint i tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. The country is heading into the middle of winter and COVID-19 cases are rising, with some health experts saying a newer variant could swamp Aotearoa in the next few weeks. Cases of BA5 are roughly doubling every week and account for 15 to 20% of cases. The sub-variant is more transmissible, meaning we could see a winter peak that's similar to the March wave, with new daily cases exceeding 20,000. And remember, right now, the health system is juggling high levels of the flu. There are 6,498 COVID cases today, with 487 people in hospital. The hospitals are already full to overflowing, and GPs have bursting waiting rooms and long waiting lists. Anei te kai ripoata, Jake McKee.
There was a noticeable shift in COVID-19 community case numbers last week. News to hand, there have been 8,028 reported cases of COVID. Meanwhile, there are 7,423. There are 6,984 new community cases of COVID.
The 7-day rolling average of cases continues to rise.
It's a trend that's so far sticking. The 7-day rolling average today is up again, 7,046. University of Auckland infectious disease expert Dr. Susie Wiles says another wave has been expected. Earlier in the year, the Prime Minister had warned of COVID continuing to spread with other winter ills.
Be mindful of the pressure on healthcare nationally. We also need to help the system recover and be ready for the expected winter. We will go through our first winter with COVID at the same time that flu returns, following 2 winters of very low rates. So as our borders open, we approach winter with the potential of more illness.
Dr. Wiles says it's happening around the world as immunity wanes and new variants emerge. She says people shouldn't feel invincible if they've had COVID because they could get reinfected. She's reminding people we might be tired of the pandemic, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Ignoring something doesn't make it go away. It just means that you're less prepared and will respond worse when it does actually happen. So, the numbers are ticking up. We've got time to start putting in place all of the things that will help keep those numbers lower.
Dr. Wiles says further red light restrictions are possible, but we already have some simple tools to keep COVID at bay.
But there are other things that we could be doing right now that we aren't doing very well. So everybody wearing masks in as many situations as they possibly can, opening doors and windows, looking into improving ventilation. And for those people who are eligible for their next booster, go and get that. That will really, really help.
And help is what some sectors need. Adam Shapley is the Managing Director of recruitment outfit Hayes. He says rising cases is bad news and will slow productivity.
There's more people off sick than I've ever seen in 20 years of work.
Mr. Shapley says most businesses are trying to get by with the staff they have, focusing on long-term hires instead of filling short-term gaps.
But as it stands today, there's already a shortage of people in the workforce. So most organisations are probably running at a highest need for staff than they have been for many years. And this is just added a further complication into what is already a challenging situation.
With the rising cases, the Ministry of Health is warning people to respect the rules if they're at a hospital. It says there's been evidence of visitors passing COVID on to patients at North Shore Hospital.
And joining us now is the Director of the Mulligan Institute and Vaccine Alliance Aotearoa New Zealand, immunologist Professor Graham Grow. Kia ora, Professor.
Kia ora.
So this new variant, BA5, it seems to be becoming the dominant one and very quickly. Do the current vaccines that New Zealand uses work against it?
Not that well. This virus is actually the latest iteration where it's trying to work around that sort of broad immunity that's been generated by the previous vaccination regimes around the world. It's a little bit like BA2, but it's found a bit of a weak link in the immune system and it's starting to be able to infect, and it probably will rise to be the dominant virus.
So when you say that the vaccines are not that effective against it, do we know exactly how effective they are?
No, because it's hard to actually trial these things in a very rigorous way. The speculation is that because we're seeing the spread in vaccinated people and people who had previous infections, it can get past that immunity. We know in the test tubes, when we try and do that, we see that current serum antibodies can't neutralise this virus as well.
Okay, so why is it more infectious? What's different about it?
It's just managed to shapeshift a little bit of its spike protein, so it still actually infects the ACE2 receptor, but it's just a little bit less visible to the. It looks a little bit different from the previous spike proteins of, say, BA2 or the Delta or the Beta virus. So it's just sneaky.
And so, okay, if it is slightly different, what about how the virus manifests itself? Does it have different symptoms? Are people suffering in a different way with it?
Looking at that very carefully around the world, it doesn't seem to be any more deaths, but it does seem to be the same level as hospitalizations as the original Omicron. So it's still a very serious virus. It's a variant of concern. It should be taken very seriously. We don't want it. You don't want to be infected by it if you can avoid it.
Okay, well, what's the deal with the vaccination then? How far off are we, for example, from some kind of universal COVID vaccine that just gets tweaked a little bit for the next variant? When is that coming?
I wish I knew exactly. It's going to be a hard road. We've got our way, our Kiwi vaccine, which we're trying to make, which we think is going to be pan-corona variant. It's really important that we keep the pedal on the accelerator on this. Around the world, there's actually a recent vaccine come out which works very well against different variants. But you need to be trying to push that forward because we're all sitting back at the moment and saying, we've solved it. We haven't. This is going to go on and on unless we get a better vaccine.
So when you say that the one you're developing, you're hoping is going to be a pan-COVID
variant, yeah.
Yes. How far down the track are you?
Well, we hope to be in clinical trials, phase 1 clinical trials early next year. Now, that's a long shot. It's a moonshot. It's really important, but we're really hoping we can get there because it's so critical for people for next season.
And so, Graham, is that a vaccine that we could have every year and it would be adapted to suit whatever strain is out there floating around?
Well, no, I'm much more optimistic. I hope it's a vaccine we could have every 5 years, only once every 5 years, and actually be done with this thing. We hope that we can find the sweet spot that really nails this virus. And there's a lot of scientists who, the more we learn about it, how it varies, what's important to the virus, it should be possible.
Okay. So experts and the government advice has changed, right? They were saying that if you'd had COVID, you didn't need to retest if you had symptoms for at least 90 days. So there was a bit of a buffer where you'd have a level of immunity. Now they're telling us 29 days, which means that you can basically get it again after 3.5 weeks, which is, I don't know, it's pretty scary, isn't it?
Bloody hell. I do. Sorry. I mean, yes, I agree. This is not good news. It means that things are could come around for some poor people again and again, especially if you've got a relatively modest immune system that doesn't give you those long protective immune titers.
Is it worth going and getting the second booster if you're eligible then, and the first one if you haven't bothered?
Highly recommended. Highly recommended. It's better than nothing. It's still, the virus is still working away from the immunity that's generated by the current Pfizer vaccine, but it's better than nothing, and it keeps those levels up. The best protection you have.
Is there any evidence to suggest that if you get it a second or third time around, it's going to be more severe, or whether there is a higher risk that you could end up with the likes of long COVID?
No. With the infection, you mean?
Yes.
No, that's unfortunately we don't know enough about that sort of future. We just don't because we haven't seen enough data coming through, but we're monitoring those sort of things very carefully. But I would imagine the more hits you have, the more chance you have of having long COVID. It just makes sense.
Really appreciate your time this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. That is Professor Graham LeGros. It is almost 17 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. This is a life-threatening emergency situation. That from the New South Wales Emergency Services Minister, Stephanie Cook, as a dangerously sodden Greater Sydney continues to be hammered with heavy rain. Extra defence personnel have been called in and fresh evacuation orders issued for thousands of residents after several suburbs flooded. Yet more rain is forecast, up to about 10 centimetres more, in the next 24 hours over wide chunks of the region. There's concern the next deluge could trigger flash floods and landslides, with river catchments already almost full to capacity. Our reporter Penny Sheffield is in Windsor in northwest Sydney, and she joins us live. Kia ora, Penny, what's the weather looking like now?
Kia ora, Lisa. Well, as you say, that next deluge, it's hitting right about now. I've hunkered down in my car and I'm watching water just flow down the street like a river into what used to be a park and now is just water for as far as the eye can see. The public toilets just in front of me are completely submerged right up to the roof. And this has been the situation right across the Hawkesbury Valley region today. I've been driving around and we've had these localised heavy falls throughout the day, up to about 50 mils an hour. And the message from the Bureau of Meteorology is we are not out of the woods yet. Rainfall is forecast for at least the next 48 hours and heavy falls for the next 24 hours. I drove out here from central Sydney this morning and the weather had just got progressively worse and worse as I drove further west. And I have to say, Lisa, it was actually quite frightening driving down the highway, the amount of water that was simply falling out of the sky. And I'm just having a look at the river rates now that they've just released. Where I am in Windsor, the Hawkesbury River is currently sitting at 12.86 metres and rising. Just upstream from us in Richmond, it's currently 14 metres and rising. So this is a situation that is far from over.
Penny, from what can you see? Are people heeding the warnings? Are they getting out where they need to?
They are. I would say Windsor is very, very quiet this afternoon. There have been 71 evacuation warnings in place across the state, and that's affecting more than 30,000 residents. I would say people are heeding the warnings. There are always going to be those that don't. I've been speaking to farmers in some rural communities today. One farmer in particular who was moving his farm vehicles to higher ground had already moved his stock, and they were parked up in trailers and trucked trailers in his driveway because he had nowhere else to put them. I also spoke to a woman who had her donkeys in the garage. Their paddock was underwater and she had nowhere else to put them. And the concern now is where do you go when you can't go home? Where do you go? Because the weather is tracking further north into the Hunter region, so you don't want to go that way. The roads are all closed further south. So really the only place to go is into the eastern sort of more metropolitan areas of Sydney. And I have to say, at least just sitting in my car here, the weather is just getting worse and worse and worse, and I'm just watching the water just crawl towards me. It's quite scary.
So, Penny, some people, well, they've been smashed 2 or 3 times in a year, in this last year, haven't they?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think that was definitely the sentiment among residents today, is that we are absolutely over it. You know, they haven't even finished rebuilding after the last flood. There was houses today that were completely underwater that hadn't even started to be rebuilt from the March floods. So understandably, spirits are very, very low here. La Nina was supposedly officially coming to an end last month, and yet here we go again. And not only that, the Bureau of Meteorology is predicting rain to continue throughout this winter and possibly into summer as well.
Thanks for the update, Penny. Do be careful driving out there. That is Penny Sheffield, who's joining us from Windsor in northwest Sydney there. And as she says, it is just chucking down there at the moment. It is 21 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Well, homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Do get in touch about the COVID predictions for forecasting a second wave in this BA5 variant. Do we need more restrictions? Have you had your booster? Are you going to get it? Or have you simply just had enough? Don't forget, you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It's time to get to the headlines now. Anea Anna Mina Pita Pita Kōrero.
Thanks, Lisa. Some health experts are warning that the new Omicron variant could send COVID-19 cases soaring in the next few weeks. Cases of the subvariant BA5 are doubling roughly every week. It's possible new daily case numbers could exceed 20,000 again. Meanwhile, the 7-day rolling average of COVID cases is 1,900 more than a week ago. There are 6,498 new community cases today. The Prime Minister says the dispute over Australia's 501 deportation policy is not necessarily simple to resolve. Jacinda Ardern is in Melbourne for her second trip to Australia this year and will meet her counterpart Anthony Albanese. At their first meeting last month, Mr Albanese committed to having another look at the practice of deporting criminals to New Zealand, even if they've spent most of their life in Australia. Extra Defence Force personnel are being brought in as Greater Sydney faces a life-threatening emergency situation. Sydney continues to be hammered by heavy rain and thousands of people have been ordered to evacuate. Another 10 centimetres of rain is forecast over the next 24 hours, which could spark more flash flooding and landslides. And more than 25,500 people have given feedback on the Christchurch Stadium. Submissions close tomorrow. The public is being asked whether the proposal should continue despite a budget blowout or whether the stadium should be redesigned or scrapped altogether. Those are the headlines. I'll be back in 20 minutes.
Kia ora rā e ho. Those leading a new methamphetamine harm reduction program in Murupara say COVID restrictions unwittingly highlighted the serious nature of the community's drug program. Te Ahi Mauri is modelled on Northland's Te Ara Oranga program, credited with reaching thousands and drastically reducing drug-related harm. Health Minister Andrew Little unveiled the free service a couple of weeks ago, pointing to Murupara's higher-than-average methamphetamine-related offences and wastewater testing results. So our reporter Nick Trubridge and cameraman Nick Monroe travelled there to talk to some of those who are behind it.
It was the height of the pandemic. Murupara moved to protect its most vulnerable. COVID checkpoints, keeping tabs on those coming and going. But they uncovered something much more sinister.
We had checkpoints during the first lockdown, and through that we saw a lot of, what would you say, trafficking, the night runs.
Night runs, meth merchants smuggling their product into tiny Murupara during COVID-19 lockdown.
We had 2 checkpoints on either side of town, and there were incidents at both checkpoints with people wanting to get through, and you're not going to question them. Safety first.
We're talking to Ormond Hines and Lila Rewe, 2 pillars in this proud Eastern Bay of Plenty community. Lila worked those checkpoints. This is her home, and this is a community desperate for help.
There's a big need here in Murupara. We're, 99% Māori here. We've needed it for a while. The drug scene here is pretty big.
Now that help's arrived, Lila is clinical lead for Te Ahi Mauri. In a nutshell, it's a meth rehab program that worked in Northland. There it reached at least 3,000, including a 34% reduction in harm from offending among people it's helped.
We want to sort of base our programs around kaupapa Māori, so that's going to the marae, going for hikoi, our maunga up there, going to our awa, doing stuff like that. It could be we might be carving pounamu, tāmoko, stuff like that. And that's about reconnecting our people because they've lost connection.
It's early days here. Funding was announced only a few weeks ago, but planning is well underway. They're determined to save whānau from the throes of addiction.
Getting them that connection back, it makes them feel they're a part of something, they're a part of society, they're a part of our iwi. So that's our main focus, is to make them feel that they have a purpose.
Ormond Hines manages Te Ika Whenua Counselling Service and says the drug problem started with marijuana. He explains how Murupara's struggle with substances has become ingrained.
This is one of the central hubs for from the coast, from up the hills or from all over the place. They'd come here and do like a swap meet with their drugs and everything. So that sort of carried on into the meth. The same mentalities carried on with meth.
Mem Jenna calls Murupara home too, working for Te Ika Whenua Hauora.
The forestry, once it's shut down, everything else shut down. And therein lay the foundation of all the disharmony that's happened in whānau.
Today, Murupara is a town that pales in comparison to what it was. Mem remembers clubs like Lions. There were plenty of jobs. The schools were packed.
We have communities that have drug alcohol abuse, family violence, crime, theft, everything there. We have minimal number of police at the time that we need them. So people are blaming the police for the issues. People are not blaming their own families and saying, hey, cut the behaviour out.
And it's behaviour she's seen firsthand.
A lot of us grandmothers who have never been there, but we're bringing up the moko. And we're watching our kids or our nieces and nephews destroy their own lives and destroy those babies' lives. Oh, heck yeah. They'll go out, they'll lie to your face. they'll go and pinch anything. While they're talking to you like this, their eyes are busy watching to see what they can take when they leave.
So I ask her, what makes her keep fighting for the people here?
Miripara's home, and I don't give a heck what other people think about Miripara, as long as our kids are safe, as long as we love the place. We know there are a lot of people who have left home, but they still look to Miripara as being home. It's home. What would you do for your home? What would you do for your home? Hey, what would you do for your babies? You'll bust your ass and you'll fight for them.
And this is what Mem wants people here to know.
There's life after death. There's life after meth. Hey, there's life after alcohol. There's life. Life is worth living more than anything else, and you have to make the difference. Once you make the decision, you're not alone. There are a lot of people to help, and for me, as if whānau can get over the whakama or the hurt, there's heaps of us here to help.
As she takes the reins at Te Ahi Mauri, Lila Rewe leaves us with this.
If you're ready to put the pipe down, you know where we are, especially for our Miripara whānau and our surrounding communities. If you're ready, you know where we are.
And if you were listening to that story from our Nix on radio, do check out the video version. We'll put it on our webpage. The Prime Minister has touched down in Melbourne, beginning a 5-day trip, a bid to reinvigorate the Trans-Tasman bond as both countries reopen to the world. It's the first trade mission to Australia since the COVID-19 pandemic, though Jacinda Ardern did pop across the ditch last month for a quick catch-up with Australia's newly elected Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. The two leaders will meet again later this week after a series of trade, tourism and business events, first in both Melbourne and Sydney.
This is something that we've been planning since New Zealand and Australia first looked to open its borders. And so it was at the time when we had travel within the bubble that we first started planning this mission. And actually, to be honest, in my mind, regardless of COVID, this is the kind of trade mission I would be keen to lead. This is one of our most important markets, whether it's tourism, whether it's trade, whether it's investment. The ability to come in with businesses, particularly those who are coming to enter into this new environment, or those who are looking to re-establish or expand their brand. It's excellent to be able to be part of that push on behalf of New Zealand.
Our political reporter Annika Smith is in Melbourne and joins us now. Kia ora, Annika. Why is the PM back in Australia so soon after her last trip?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, she's boomeranged back to Australia just a few weeks after being here early June to, as you said earlier, meet her friend and now Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese. And that meeting was really framed as a reset of the relationship that had been tested under Scott Morrison's government. This upcoming week, is all about trade and business across the Tasman. The Prime Minister's just fresh from Europe. She's just sealed the EU FTA. And this afternoon, her and I think about a 31-strong business delegation were formally welcomed to Australia at MCG, and they'll spend the next week here in Melbourne and then on to Sydney, pushing Trans-Tasman business and trade now that the borders are open.
So, Annika, there was a little hint of progress on the 501s issue last month. Any breakthrough expected this week?
Yeah, I think emphasis on hints there, Lisa. I think the Prime Minister, in her own words, is taking a realistic approach, being back in Australia so soon after meeting Anthony Albanese a few weeks ago. This is obviously, the 501 deportee issue has been a long-standing point of contention, and we asked today, do you expect to walk away at the end of the week with any material changes to that policy? Jacinda Ardern said she wasn't going to set expectations this early on. But interestingly, she went on to say that issues underpinning 501 deportees, that really boils down to citizenship, the rights that New Zealanders have living in Australia. And Jacinda Ardern said deportees, that issue wouldn't be as big if Kiwis living here had more status and rights. A few weeks ago, Jacinda Ardern said that there had been a significant shift in Australia's approach to 501s. Anthony Albanese promised that he'd heard Jacinda Ardern and he would think about it. So whether that will actually materialise into any policy changes come end of week remains to be seen. It really is in Australia's, the ball's in Australia's court here on this one, so we'll have to see come Friday.
Thanks, Annika. That's political reporter Annika Smith, who is in Melbourne on the Prime Minister's trip. It is 28 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. And it is time now for the business news. Ko taku hoa i naenei, ko Anand Zaki. Kia ora, Anand. Sky City facing an inquiry across the Tasman. What's going on?
Kia ora, Lisa. Yeah, their Adelaide casinos come under the microscope, and this has actually come after similar investigations in other Australian states, and it's part of a wider crackdown on casinos across Australia, looking into potential breaches of anti-money laundering law, governance and culture issues, all across the past couple of years. And it's not for the first time that Sky City has come under the microscope. It was already under investigation for potential non-compliance at its Adelaide casino last year. And the worries relate to their due diligence and how they manage their high-risk customers or those who are, what they say, politically exposed. And the sector regulator in South Australia is reviewing Sky City to make sure the company is still suitable to hold a gambling operator license in Adelaide. Now, like I said, there's been a big crackdown in Australia into this. Recent inquiries into Sky City's competitors found a number of failings at Crown Casinos and Star Entertainment, a couple of the other operators. And Sky City, they've come out today and said that they'll fully cooperate with the review, which is being led by a Supreme Court judge, and it's expected to take around 7 months to finish. Now, on the investment side, an analyst said this morning that it's clearly a negative for Sky City, and the bigger picture or the bigger issue for the company is that if there'd be any spillover to New Zealand's regulatory picture. So certainly one to keep an eye out on.
And Anand, tell us about this long-established Wellington tech firm that's been snapped up.
Well, it's another one on the list of those being snapped up in the tech sector. Qual IT, I think that's how you say it, and its partner company Secure, which do quality assurance on IT apps and test cybersecurity of systems. They're being snapped up by Australian-based Planet, which is part of the Japanese financial services group Nomura. And the firm's founders say the deal will provide the company, which is about 20 years old, with resources for growth. And they say it'll provide immediate scale, intellectual property, geographical spread, and a much bigger balance sheet. And they say that joining a global company is a big opportunity for them, giving them access to international resources, network systems. So it's a growth opportunity for them, essentially. Now, the price hasn't been disclosed, but we've been told that senior managers and the 250 staff the company has in Christchurch, Auckland and Wellington will be kept, as would the current branding. And the newly merged group would count among the top 10 IT firms in New Zealand, and it's the latest in a number of deals which have seen New Zealand tech companies snapped up by overseas buyers, including Sir Peter Jackson's Weta Digital and Christchurch-based software developer Sequent being sold to a US-based firm as well. So lots happening in the sector, Lisa.
And Anand, how are the markets looking today?
Well, the top 50 index closed the day up 1% or 109 points to 10,862. The New Zealand dollar is at 62.1 US cents and 91 Australian cents.
Thanks, Anand. Ka kite. Anand Zaki there with business news. Flu infection rates this month hit a 7-year high according to ESR figures, and it's the under 18-year-olds that are being slammed, with infection rates up to 5 times higher than 18 to 64-year-olds. Dr. Sue Huang is a virologist and the director of the World Health Organization National Influenza Centre at ESR, and she joins us now. Kia ora, Doctor.
Hello, how are you? Good evening.
I'm very well, thanks. Can you tell us in a little bit more detail what patterns you are seeing in the flu this year, the numbers and the spread?
Well, as you all know, influenza is back in New Zealand after absence for 2 years. and soon it spread to all main centres, both in South Island, North Island. And the influenza cases increased exponentially in June. And this is earlier than usual before COVID pandemic. Usually it's around July or August. And as you said, the influenza activity is high this year. The hospitalization rate is nearly 3 times high than the peak rate during the pre-pandemic years.
Doctor, I noticed that the figures are higher than they even were before COVID. So obviously the border closed, which meant to some degree the flu was kept out. But the numbers are even higher than pre-COVID. Why is that, do you think?
Because when we have no flu in the last 2 years, it resulted in low immunity against the influenza. This also means that we have more people susceptible to influenza infection, and that is why we are seeing high level of influenza activities, higher than usual.
Yeah. Is there anything in the numbers that you're seeing or the spread of the flu that is causing you particular concern?
No, actually, I think it's really predicted what's going to happen. When you have a low immunity, you have more susceptible people to get a flu infection. You would see a pattern, what we are seeing. It's into the flu season, high level of the activity. But overall, it is still in a range of a seasonal influenza activity range. It's just higher than usual. That's all. It's not like extraordinary high.
So if we have reached a peak early, does that mean it will drop away sooner than expected?
It is going down to that pathway. It's coming down in the last 2 weeks, but you never know. Our winter is continuing, whether we will experience another peak or not. So it's very important for us to monitor closely to see what's going on. Because in the previous years, we would see sometimes you have one peak and then after a while it goes on another peak.
So you can't rule out a second peak?
No, you can't rule out.
Thank you so much for your time this evening. Thank you for joining us. That is Dr. Sue Huang, who is a virologist, and she's also the director of the World Health Organisation's National Influenza Centre, which is based at ESR. It is 20 minutes to 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And coming up, the low interest loan on offer to green up your home or your car. How much will it cost and is there a catch? And Homai Ofakaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. 2101 on text, or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or the email address checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to get to the headlines now. Ko Anna Ano tēnei.
Thanks, Lisa. The director of the Malligan Institute claims the Pfizer vaccine is not altogether effective against the new Omicron BA5 variant. But Professor Graham says, but it is better than nothing and it keeps up immunity levels, which is the best protection a person can have. Meanwhile, cases of the flu are at a 7-year high. Figures from ESR show people aged under 18 are being hit the hardest. Jacinda Ardern says she'll be looking for signs that New Zealand is being listened to over Australia's contentious 501 deportation policy. The Prime Minister is in Melbourne and will meet her counterpart Anthony Albanese this week. She says the deportation issue is not simple to resolve and changes will take time to work through. She hopes Mr Albanese tells her that progress is being made. Restaurant owners are hitting back at criticism by the Immigration Minister that they need to offer better pay and conditions to attract staff. Lou McDowell, who owns Queenstown's Flame Bar and Grill, says she already pays $27 an hour for entry-level servers and offers staff meals and counselling support. In traffic news, at least 3 vehicles have been involved in a serious crash in Havelock North this afternoon. Emergency services are at St George's Road. Motorists are being asked to avoid the area. And in Auckland, a breakdown is part blocking the southbound State Highway 1 Upper Harbour Highway off-ramp. Pass with care and expect delays. Those are the headlines. I'll be back at 6 o'clock with more news and sport.
Ngā mihi, Anna. And some of you are getting in touch about COVID and the predictions for a second wave. This is the BA5 strain that they're talking about. Should be about to take over in terms of the majority of cases. This listener says, why is the government not ramping up mandatory mask wearing, restrict numbers in venues, bugger businesses and tourist operators? Staying alive is more important. Some businesses have shown they can be innovative. Let's do it, says Mo from, I think, Dunedin. I'm seeing more and more people in shops without masks, this listener says, and wonder if they're anti-maskers, ignorant or whatever. There will definitely be a major surge in cases if people are getting lazy or arrogant. One big problem is that businesses actually have no legal ability to enforce a mask requirement. Go figure, says Simon. And Angela's got in touch to say, getting my second booster when due. Our choir has had rehearsals from the start of COVID wearing masks, and not a single case has been caught there or passed on when caught elsewhere. So masks are very effective. I'm sold on them, says Angela. That's really interesting because remember they were telling us right at the start about singing and the ability to spread COVID through singing. And a gunman in Denmark has killed 3 people and wounded several others when he opened fire in a shopping mall in Copenhagen. A 22-year-old Danish man has been arrested and charged with the attack, which sparked panic with shoppers at the mall. The BBC's Gordon Carrera reports.
Chaos on a Sunday afternoon as gunfire erupts inside the Fields shopping centre in Copenhagen. Some shoppers fled the complex, others tried to find cover, desperately seeking hiding places.
We were just about to order food and then we heard shooting, 2, 3, 4 shots. So I said to my daughter who had taken a seat to lie down. Then we ran into a disabled toilet and we closed the door.
Outside, police and emergency services raced to the scene, closing off the shopping centre. Members of the public were evacuated. Those inside were told to stay and wait for police to come to them as they secured the building.
We can confirm there has been a shooting with many casualties. We now know there are also several killed. When we arrived there, we apprehended a suspect in the immediate vicinity of Fields. He is now in custody, and we are now working on the information we have on him.
A concert by the singer Harry Styles was about to start only a mile from the shooting. Police described the man they detained as a 22-year-old Dane. They do not believe there were other gunmen. They've not yet said what they believe the man's motive was, but police say they cannot rule out terrorism.
And it is 5:45. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Aotearoa's biggest bank is offering low-interest green for customers to go greener. ANZ's launched a home loan top-up where customers can borrow an extra $80,000 at a 3-year fixed interest rate of 1%. Now, it's to make energy improvements to their home, like solar panels or heating and insulation, or it can be used to buy a low-emission vehicle. Ben Callagher from ANZ joins us now. Kia ora, Ben. Why are you offering this up right now?
Good, Lisa. 8 out of 10 customers we recently surveyed said that they planned or would like to improve the energy efficiency around their homes. And cost was one of the large barriers for doing that. So we thought, how can we help? And so we've come up with this good energy loan, which is a top-up for our existing ANZ home loan customers, up to $80,000 at 1%, like you mentioned, for 3 years. To enable them to do that.
So what's permitted? What can you buy with the money or do with it?
There's a whole range of things that customers can do, and if they're interested, they can go onto our website to look. But there's things like solar, ventilation, insulation, heat pumps, but even things through to like rainwater catchment, which we know is a big deal in the dry summer months, particularly in some areas in New Zealand. And then also things like electric and hybrid vehicles and EV chargers as well.
But here's the rub, Ben. What happens at the end of 3 years with the interest rate?
So at the end of the 3 years, it just reverts back to the standard rate, and customers can then choose to either keep it floating at that point in time or lock it into a fixed rate, which I imagine lots of customers would like to do at that point in time.
Okay, so what's your current floating rate and what's your current standard fixed rate for, say, 3 years?
So it varies at the moment. It's moving around a bit at the moment. But if I give you our 1 year, our 2 years and 3 years, so a one year rate, which is our most popular rate at the moment, is at 5.35, and our 3-year rate is currently sitting at 5.99. So
that's the special rate. The 5.99 is the special rate, and then your standard rate is 6.58%, right, for 3 years.
Yeah.
So my point is, obviously, it's an enormous jump after 3 years. On average, how long does it take people to pay back 80K? More than 3 years?
Well, we imagine that most customers won't be taking out the 80K. That's the extent that they can take out. For a heat pump, you're certainly not looking at 80K or insulation or ventilation. So that's the maximum. And we expect it to be, on average, probably something around between 5 to 10, depending on what customers take out with us.
It is a cut rate interest rate, right? So 1%, yeah. If the bank can afford to offer this money at such a low interest rate, why not give people a better deal on home mortgage rates in these hard times?
Yeah, so inflation is really high at the moment, and that's driving higher interest rates, and both in New Zealand but also internationally. We've seen that across the board. But we will continue to ensure we have competitive rates, and we have a current rate at the moment, 3.18% for those looking to build a new house as well. So we're trying to innovate around the home loan market to try and help customers do what they want to do in this space. We're also very conscious that it's not just the home loan story, and we've got, we're trying to make sure that we have really good rates for savers as well. But this is a unique offering, which is quite unique in the market with a specific purpose, and we hope that many customers will take this up to help them with their energy efficiency journey. As I said, 80% of customers that we recently spoke to said to us that they would like to do something in this space. So this is our way of helping them with that cost barrier. Obviously, it's not suitable for everyone, and our customers will still have to go through, affordability checks like we would for any loan. But we know that there is demand for this, and we're excited with it.
Thanks for joining us, Ben. That's Ben Callagher, who's from the ANZ. The SOS cries from GPs are growing louder under the weight of demand for their services. Waiting rooms have been full to bursting, and that's if you can get in to see a GP, as the workforce faces twin battles of being overworked and understaffed. Dr Shane Reti is a practising family doctor as well as a national MP, and fears the health reforms will completely miss the mark. Our reporter Katie Todd went with him to see what the front line looks like.
The practice we're going to today, several decades ago, when I was locuming across the city, I locumed here at this practice.
The short red buildings of Bush Road Medical Centre in Kamo are pretty familiar to Dr Shane Reti, and so is the doctor who ushers us inside his room. He's Dr Jeff Cunningham. They used to work together, and the doctor's been at this practice for more than 2 decades. Whangarei GP work looks a bit different now compared to when he started. Dr Cunningham says it's become a relentless toil.
The nurses are running, the doctors are running. It's crazy.
Dr Cunningham says the whole health system is falling over. He's seeing more than 40 patients each day, plus phone consults. If he's lucky, he'll catch a 10-minute break for lunch.
I'm here from usually consulting from 8 till often after 5 o'clock, and doing urgent paperwork until 6 o'clock, and then I'm back home, quick dinner, and then I'm back on the computer for at least 2 hours, usually 3.
Shane Reti explains right around Whangarei, GP clinics are bulging at the seams and most aren't taking new patients.
Good luck trying to get a same-day appointment with your GP.
It's more than just a busy winter. He says there simply aren't enough doctors, and a recent survey found half the GPs currently practising in the region intend to retire within 6 years. Dr Cunningham's tried hiring new graduates with little luck.
Just recently, we were all excited. We had a new doctor start, fully qualified GP, young, energetic, brilliant. And after 3 months' work, he's resigned. He's starting work at the hospital as a psychiatry registrar. And the scary thing is he's got 3 other friends who did general practice together. He's the last of the 4 to quit general practice. His other 3 friends have quit general practice as well. Just the workload was far too high.
Northland is locked into a scheme that means it can't ask patients to pay more, but clinic funding increases haven't met inflation for the past 18 out of 19 years. Dr Cunningham hasn't had a pay rise for 10 years. GP shortages are being felt nationwide, but any new GPs heading to Northland will have to work particularly hard for less money than they can earn elsewhere. Shane Reti says with huge wait times at the local ED as well, the crisis is probably already impacting on people's health. Out on the streets of Whangarei, people tell RNZ they're having to shop around to see a doctor.
I do have a regular, but he's very hard to get into, so you pretty much end up going to any GP that you can get into.
Sometimes it's really hard switching doctors because you don't have that same rapport and they don't understand your file, but it is a bit of a concern that they're going to retire and that we might be having a shortage.
Health New Zealand and the Māori Health Authority have just swallowed up the country's district health boards, the sector's biggest shake-up in decades. I asked Dr Cunningham if that offers any hope.
We've got a car that's out of gas and the wheels have fallen off and we've just purchased one, maybe arguably two very, very expensive new steering wheels, big steering wheels for it. I just can't see how that car's going to go any better with that.
Shane Reti says GPs are rightly distressed about the reforms and their future. He thinks the real solution is right there for the taking: increased funding and tweaks to immigration settings.
Who would want to come and work in an environment where, as we hear from our colleagues, they're overstretched, overworked, underpaid and exhausted? That's not a welcoming environment, so we need to figure out those immigration settings. Secondly, we have doctors and nurses driving Uber Eats. They're already here, they're permanent residents. Why can't we find that pathway for them to onboard?
Dr Reti says primary care needs to be given the equipment, tools and people to do their job well, and everyone will feel the benefits.
Restaurant owners are hitting back after the Immigration Minister Michael Wood said they should offer better conditions and pay if they want to attract staff. It comes after months of significant labour shortages that are causing businesses to cut back their opening hours and services. Tess Brunton has more.
In Queenstown, Flame Bar and Grill owner Lou McDowell has been spending about $2,000 a month on Seek, trying to attract more staff. She was frustrated to hear the Immigration Minister's comments.
He's got absolutely no idea. I mean, how can you make better working conditions and offer more pay when there's no one actually applying for the jobs? You know, the problem is supply. There is just no staff. So you could offer someone $50 an hour and they're still not going to turn up for a job interview because there's no one to turn up.
Her business offers $27 an hour for an entry-level server, along with staff meals, counselling support and an aim to give staff 2 days off in a row.
We have to close one night a week because we haven't got enough staff, and then 4 nights a week we've had to close half the restaurant because we haven't got enough staff. And the travesty now is the demand's there, the actual demand's there, but we haven't got enough staff to fully open. So we're turning, customers away in their droves because we've had to close half the restaurant.
In Auckland, Vivace restaurant part owner Mandy Lusk says most places treat and pay their staff very well because they want to keep trained workers.
You wouldn't get anyone walking through your doors if you offered even the minimum wage. You just wouldn't have a chance. Most of us are paying well above that.
Vivace now closes on Sunday and Monday to protect their staff and has to turn down functions to ensure there are 2 days off in a row. They have about 160 hours a week of work they can't cover, despite advertising non-stop for months.
We've been forced to reduce our hours at night because we simply can't find staff. We can't get them home because of public transport issues. And so we've had to start shutting early because the trains, particularly on the weekend when the trains and things haven't been running, we're doing everything we can to make it easy and attractive for staff to get in and work in the city.
They have a few young Kiwi students on their books, but restrictions with student allowances means she can't offer them more work.
Some of them can only earn $200 a week. And that's actually, it seems kind of crazy because for them, they're stressed. Also, they need to earn more because the cost of living's going up, their rent's going up, and yet they can't work anymore legally. For us, if those caps were moved, it would give us a huge help. It sort of means they can work 10 or 12 hours a week, which is kind of ridiculous if you're trying to support yourself as a student as well.
Immigration Minister Michael Wood says work needs to be done to ensure fair and reasonable working conditions for all staff. Chi Chi Kitchen owner Eugene Chang says comments over pay aren't fair.
hospitality starts from a one-man band up to, 50 staff business as well. So you can't generalize without paying our staff or employee not well. I think everybody is trying to their best to look after their staff because we don't want to lose trained staff.
But the minister is standing by what he says.
And I acknowledge that in many of these sectors there has been work going on. I have to say that at the same time I do sometimes speak to workers from these sectors who reflect that that is not universally always the case and can be off-putting of New Zealanders working in some of these sectors. So we've got to do that work positively and constructively to lift pay and conditions.
Today, Minister Wood announced the final stage of a new simplified visa that allows offshore migrants to apply to come and work in Aotearoa for an accredited employer is live.
This year is about how we reconnect and how other countries reconnect with us. Today really is the first day in which the work visa system is fully open again. So I know it's been tight up until now, but this system will enable us to start easing some of that pressure in the months to come.
Michael Wood says the visas of more than 33,000 critical workers and 13,000 working holiday makers have been approved so far.
And some of you getting in touch about this already. Sandy says the Minister of Immigration just shows how out of touch he is, saying pay more. Typical Labor response, thinks everyone's paid peanuts when in fact the opposite is more correct. On the flu season and expectations of rising COVID numbers, this teacher from the Bay of Plenty's got in touch to say, "Hi Lisa, 2 words, ball season." Under 18s and the flu. Yeah, I wonder what's going to happen then. On the Murupara meth harm reduction program, this listener's got in touch to say those addicts are so lucky to have whānau who are standing for them through the good and the bad and keeping living them through it all, not unconditionally, but with both honesty and tenacity. Many of us wish we had people like that in our lives. And on the ANZ's cheap loan, 1% interest over 3 years for up to $80,000 if you're going to do green improvements to your home or buy a low emissions vehicle. Dave says it's an excellent idea. Hopefully it's an idea that carries on to TSB and others. If people use the savings from energy electric car investment, it'll likely pay off this loan or bite heavily into the principal. Kudos to ANZ. Matt in Auckland, on the other hand, wow, he's got different reckons, says ironically, won't the ANZ low interest loans only exacerbate inflation, causing more cash rate increases? And on GPs, this on the GP in that piece from Katie Todd. Jeff is a Mazeballs person and a really honest GP.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Anna Thomas. The director of the Mulligan Institute says the Pfizer vaccine is not altogether effective against the new Omicron BA5 variant. But Professor Graham LeGros has told Checkpoint it's better than nothing and it keeps up immunity levels, which is the best protection a person can have. There were 6,498 cases of COVID-19 reported today, with the 7-day rolling average at 7,046. Last Monday, it was 5,132. Meanwhile, cases of the flu are at a 7-year high. Figures from ESR show people aged under 18 are being hit the hardest. A Whangarei GP who is working 70-hour weeks is hitting out at the health reforms as his clinic faces relentless pressure. Dr. Jeff Cunningham describes the new health entities as new steering wheels for a car that's missing its wheels and has run out of gas. He says he's working until 10 or 11 o'clock each night and hasn't had a pay rise in 10 years. Dr. Cunningham says he's also witnessing new GPs quitting.
You've got a workforce that is exhausted. You've got a workforce that, like myself, is working endless 65, 70-hour weeks under immense stress, as hard and as fast as they can, literally running.
Meanwhile, Dr. Cunningham's former colleague, now National MP Shane Reti, says most Whangarei clinics are not accepting new patients and are not offering same-day appointments. The Prime Minister is playing down any expectation of a breakthrough this week on a long simmering Trans-Tasman tension, Australia's 501 deportation policy. Jacinda Ardern is in Melbourne for her second trip to Australia this year and will meet her counterpart, Anthony Albanese, later this week. At their first meeting last month, Mr Albanese committed to having another look at the practice of deporting criminals to New Zealand, even if they've spent most of their life in Australia. Ms Ardern says the dispute is not necessarily simple to resolve and changes may take time to work through. She returns home on Friday. Danish police say the 22-year-old suspect charged in connection with a deadly shopping centre shooting in Copenhagen was known to police. They say his motive is unclear but cannot rule out an act of terrorism. At least 3 people have been killed and 3 are in a critical condition in hospital. Footage from inside the shopping centre shows people running in panic as gunshots are fired. This witness says she hid with a group of people.
Suddenly we heard shots. I think I heard 10 shots. And then we ran through them all and ended up in a toilet where we huddled together and waited. There were about 11 of us, I think. We were really scared. It's been a terrible experience.
Restaurant owners say they're already paying staff more, as the Immigration Minister suggests that better pay and working conditions will attract employees. The owner of Flame Bar and Grill in Queenstown, Lou McDowell, says the Minister's comments are frustrating. She says her business offers $27 an hour for an entry-level server. Employees also get meals, counselling support, and she tries to give them 2 days off in a row. Ms McDowell says she spent about $2,000 in a month on advertising, trying to attract more staff with limited success. Hospitality businesses have suffered months of labour shortages, causing some to cut their opening hours and services. New Zealand is banning all imports of Russian gold in the latest round of sanctions against the country. Foreign Affairs Minister Nanaia Mahuta says the sanctions have been made to prevent Russia using its gold reserves to finance the war in Ukraine. 20% of Russia's central bank reserves are held in gold, and it's the country's largest export outside energy. It follows a similar move by Australia, the UK, US, Canada and Japan. The ban comes into effect later this month. A group of women have gathered outside the US consulate in Auckland to condemn the recent overturning of the Roe v. Wade abortion legislation. The constitutional right to an abortion in America was lost when the 50-year-old law was overturned last month. America celebrates Independence Day on the 4th of July, but expat Karen Schmidt says it is not a day for celebration.
Doesn't mean that my heart isn't bleeding for those back home that have to contend with the contentious government that seems to be serving its own purposes versus the will of the people.
And the group delivered a signed copy of the New Zealand abortion legislation to the United States consulate. The police say 4 people have been arrested after street racing on the Waikato Expressway. They say they received reports of vehicles heading south from Hampton Downs around midday. 1 vehicle was spiked and another caught later in Hamilton East. 4 people have been referred to youth aid. Researchers in England have discovered a new type of giant water lily. They've realised that a plant held in several botanical gardens for more than 150 years was actually a separate species. Here's BBC Science editor Rebecca Morrell.
This new species of water lily is the world's biggest, with rubbery green leaves that can grow more than 10 feet wide and huge white and pink flowers. Since it was first discovered in the 1800s, it's been incorrectly identified as another species of giant water lily. But scientists at Kew suspected this was a mistake. So they grew the plant from seed and found many features from its size and shape to its genetics were different, confirming the species was new to science. The giant water lily is now called Victoria boliviana, named after its natural home in Bolivia, where it grows in parts of the Amazon River system.
To sport now, and the All Blacks are back to full strength with the players who were struck down by COVID-19 last week returning ahead of the second test against Ireland. Crusaders trio David Havili, Jack Goodhue and Will Jordan have now rejoined the squad after missing Saturday's 42-19 demolition of the Irish due to isolation requirements. The All Blacks arrived in Dunedin yesterday to a warm welcome from the southern city. First five, Bowden Barrett says the team is pleased to welcome back the group.
It just means that we can have a really good training week. That's guaranteed. Last week we were a little bit down on numbers and had to bring people in, and obviously it brings more experience having Jack and Davey and Will back in the squad. It's great for us.
The Silver Ferns coach says playing a range of styles during next week's Cadbury series will be hugely beneficial as they prepare for the Commonwealth Games. The Ferns are playing the New Zealand men, the New Zealand A side and an invitational mixed side, which includes two former Australian internationals. Dame Nolene Taurua says the series will give the Silver Ferns a sample of what they'll get in Birmingham.
The opposition is going to be different every time we take the court, so playing in Commonwealth Games, that's what's going to happen in regards to different opposition, different styles and our ability to combat them.
And the four-day Cadbury Netball Series is being held from July the 13th at the Pullman Arena in Auckland. And that's the news.
Tonight on Nights, why mushrooms are popping up in Auckland's Aotea Square. It's more about the art festival Elemental Auckland than it is a measure of the city's humidity. Zoe George reviews the weekend sport, and rock star Susie Quattro introduces us to a hero of hers, Carol Kay, a woman who established herself as a leading session musician back in the late 50s, still alive and now 87 years young. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
And now the short forecast from Met Service until midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Taupo and Bay of Plenty. Fine with increasing high cloud. Cloudy tomorrow with isolated showers turning to rain in Taranaki and Northland in the morning and elsewhere later with some heavy falls possible. In the west, from Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape, fine, scattered showers developing tomorrow morning, turning to rain in the afternoon, some possibly heavy later. Gisborne to Wairadapa, scattered rain developing tomorrow afternoon. Westland, Bulla, Nelson and Marlborough, cloud increasing tomorrow with rain in Bulla and Westland, spreading elsewhere in the afternoon, then clearing everywhere in the evening. Canterbury, fine, increasing high cloud tomorrow. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers in Fiordland, mainly fine in Otago and Southland apart from a few evening showers tomorrow. And for the Chatham Islands, fine with a few showers later tomorrow. RNZ National. It is 6:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint with Lisa Owen.
Ngā mihi, Anna. No mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Thousands of people have been forced to evacuate their homes across Greater Sydney due to rising floodwaters and relentless rain. More rain is forecast for the next 24 hours, with Sydney, the Illawarra, Blue Mountains and the Central Coast all expected to take a pounding. Authorities are warning the wild weather could trigger flash floods and landslips, with river catchments almost nearly full due to increased rain patterns over Australia's east coast for the past 2 years. ABC reporter Peter Ryan joins us now from Sydney. Hey Peter, what's the latest there?
Well, Lisa, just looking out my window here at the moment, the rain is continuing to pound down. The skies are grey, very black. Probably expecting more of this rain in the coming days, maybe over the next week. But in southwest Sydney and in northwest Sydney, it's been, Groundhog Day again for people who've been through these floods 2, maybe 3 times a year. There were some people in Sydney's southwest who were just recovering from the floods that they were already hit with a few months ago. Keep in mind that Sydney's been immersed in rain for most of this year. There was a bit of a respite over the last month or so, but people are only just recovering. I heard someone saying that they are only just starting to deal with their initial insurance claims when this new one has hit. So water everywhere. The main Sydney water supply, Warragamba Dam, is flowing over. It's at capacity. They've been releasing water. So incredibly damaging and very dangerous. And people's livelihoods and lives are really in danger.
I see the Premier calling in more defence troops as well.
Yeah, that's right, and it's also not surprising given the floods that we had on the New South Wales North Coast around Lismore earlier this year, where there was a lot of criticism that the Defence Forces didn't act fast enough, didn't act quickly enough, and so there's been really no delay this time in getting Defence personnel down into southwest Sydney and northwest Sydney to assist the State Emergency Service to help people get out to evacuate, but also to do what I suppose is the usual thing, to encourage people not to drive where there are floodwaters. And time again, we're still seeing people drive through floodwaters, being stuck and endangering their own lives and the lives of their rescuers.
And have there been more mandatory evacuation orders today?
There have been some mandatory evacuation orders in southwest Sydney, we've seen, where it just got to that point where people have been told you must leave your home. Of course, once again, you have the usual situation where some people just don't want to leave. That's their castle, they're not leaving. But most people are leaving, packing up and taking what they can. I was watching on the ABC News 24 channel this afternoon. There was a family packing up children's toys, old Christmas presents, anything that they could get from their homes, like photo albums. And keep in mind, we've been through bushfires here in recent years. And of course, a lot of businesses and individuals are recovering from the lockdowns during the pandemic, which were, a year ago. We were all locked down. Businesses are still recovering. So this is another blow. And I think the idea that you have floods only once in 100 years really has been dispelled. And I think the insurance industry is noting that as well.
So it's not just on land either, is it, Peter? What can you tell us about this cargo ship that's in a bit of bother?
Yeah, well, this cargo ship had a main bearing go with one of its engines and was coming in dangerously close to the Sydney coastline and looked like it might have been crashing in on rocks. They threw anchors down to stop it from going in, but now it looks as though there are a couple of tugboats that are going to be taking the ship out into deeper and calmer water. So no one's been evacuated from the ship as yet, but looking at some of the pictures, very dramatic. You wouldn't want to suffer from seasickness out there at all. Some of the pictures coming from the ABC helicopter looked treacherous out there, but it looks as though they're going to be able to recover it.
I notice some criticism emerging about whether people were given enough warning and whether Australia as a whole has done enough in terms of battling climate change.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned before, with those floods on the New South Wales North Coast at Lismore, there was a lot of criticism that people weren't given enough notice, that the Bureau of Meteorology didn't warn quickly enough, emergency officials didn't warn people quickly enough to get out while they could. So lessons are being learned really quickly here at the moment, Lisa. And as I mentioned earlier, the Premier of New South Wales, Dominic Perrottet, has made the point that he wants to see more defence personnel there. It looks as though some of those, the issues that they had earlier in the year in rivalries between federal officials and state officials and local officials may well have been resolved because of some of the criticisms about how those floods were handled. But yes, these floods are happening faster and more quickly than anyone would ever expect. And I think that people living in those low-lying areas really perhaps should be prepared with their suitcase ready to go. They just don't know when these type of floods are going to be happening again.
Really appreciate your time, Peter. Thank you for joining us. That is Peter Ryan, ABC reporter there live from Sydney. It is 6:15 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In the Danish capital of Copenhagen, a 22-year-old man is in custody following a shooting at a city shopping centre in which 3 were killed and many others injured, some critically. Søren Thomason is the city's police chief. At a news conference, he said a man had been charged with manslaughter and would appear before a judge tonight, New Zealand time. He also gave more detail about the casualties.
We have a situation in which 3 people have been killed, a man in his 40s and 2 young people. In addition, we have several injured, but 3 are in a critical condition. That's what the situation looks like now.
The shooting prompted a huge police response with a vast number of armed officers patrolling and searching the surrounding area. These people were nearby when the shooting started.
We were just about to order food and then we heard shooting, 2, 3, 4 shots. So I said to my daughter, who had taken a seat, to lie down. Then we ran into a disabled toilet and we closed the door.
Suddenly we heard shots. I think I heard 10 shots. And then we ran through them all and ended up in a toilet where we huddled together and waited. There were about 11 of us, I think. We were really scared. It's been a terrible experience.
And BBC reporter Adrienne Murray is in Copenhagen.
We understand that the police were first notified that a shooting was taking place at around 5:30 p.m. on Sunday local time. They soon arrived at the Field Shopping Centre in South Copenhagen. They sealed it off, had a very large police presence that were very heavily armed. And it's not clear exactly what time the suspect was detained, but there are some eyewitness reports that there was still shooting till after 7 p.m. However, mobile phone footage has now emerged of this individual being surrounded by police who were pointing guns at him and then pulling him down to the floor and arresting him. And that actually took place outside the shopping centre. Now, what they say so far is that the motive remains unknown, but they also added that they could not rule out a terror attack, and they're on high alert at the moment. And this heavy police presence will be continuing, not just in Copenhagen, but also high alert across Zealand, which is the region, the island that Copenhagen is located on.
She says there are reports the man was using a hunting rifle.
Well, the police themselves didn't comment on the weapon, but certainly some eyewitness accounts have described him carrying what they thought was a shotgun or a hunting rifle. Some eyewitnesses detailed hearing singular shots, very loud single shots, rather than continuous automatic fire. But the police have not yet commented on what the weapon was.
While our Prime Minister has touched down in Australia, Australia's Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has visited the Ukraine and toured towns where officials say Russia has committed war crimes. Mr Albanese has also pledged another $100 million in military aid and told President Volodymyr Zelensky his country will back Ukraine for as long as it takes to defeat Russia. The ABC's Europe correspondent Steve Kinane reports.
As Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese walked the streets of Irpin. He was confronted by the unconscionable brutality of the Russian attack on Ukraine's civilian population. Around 300 civilians died here in the early weeks of the war, and the remnants of those attacks remain in the form of bullet-riddled cars and destroyed homes. The Prime Minister is unlikely to forget what he saw.
And here we have what's clearly a residential building. Another one just behind it, brutally assaulted. This is a war crime. It's devastating. What you know is that, this isn't a building, this homes. And these are livelihoods and indeed lives that have been lost here. In this town.
Later on, President Zelensky welcomed Mr Albanese to the capital, Kyiv, the first Australian Prime Minister to visit Ukraine.
Mr Prime Minister, nice to meet you. You're welcome.
President Zelensky described Australia as one of the top countries helping Ukraine and said he was thankful for the Bushmaster vehicles and other aid. But he urged all countries to do more. We are fighting a war against Russia, he said. There will never be enough weapons against Russia. It depends not only on one country. Enough weapons is when you have fire superiority, enough to pressure on Russia for it to quit our territories. So no matter how much one country wants to help, the help of one country would not be enough. I am thankful for the amount of weapons Australia provides us. Anthony Albanese announced that Australia would be giving another $100 million worth of military aid, making it the highest non-NATO contributor to Ukraine's war effort. Included are another 20 Bushmasters, 14 armoured personnel carriers and other military equipment, including drones.
Australia stands ready to continue to support the government and the people of Ukraine for as long as it takes for Ukraine to emerge victorious in defence of your national sovereignty and your homeland.
The Prime Minister also announced further sanctions against Russian ministers and oligarchs, a prohibition on Russian gold imports, and support of Ukraine's case against Russia in the International Court of Justice.
Meanwhile, the eastern Ukraine city of Lysychansk has fallen to Russian forces. Ukraine has confirmed its forces have withdrawn from the city. Until now, it was the last Ukrainian stronghold in the Luhansk, which is part of the industrial Donbass region that Russia is focusing on. The BBC's Sarah Rainsford reports.
The capture of Lysychansk was a moment for Russian forces to celebrate. But their backdrop was another Ukrainian city in ruins. Russia has been pushing through the eastern Donbass for weeks, blasting Ukrainian positions in a slow but deadly advance. Vladimir Putin calls this a war of liberation. Ukraine says it's obliteration. Its own forces have been defending with everything they've got. But they say they need more, because Russia's firepower is overwhelming them. And on day 130 of this war, Ukraine had to admit it had lost Lysychansk. That means the whole Luhansk region, half of the Donbass. In his nightly address, Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed Ukrainian troops had withdrawn, for now.
We care about the lives of our soldiers. We can rebuild the walls. We will win back the territory, but people must be taken care of, above all.
In Kiev, we met soldiers just back from the Donbass. A businessman, a mechanic and a medic before the war. 3 men who volunteered to fight when Vladimir Putin invaded their country.
Russians like tactic to destroy all of city or village. Totally.
Everyone is afraid to die. Everyone is afraid of explosions. We want to protect our families, friends, wives from terrible scenes that Russians do with our citizens in Irpin, Bucha, Gostomel, Mariupol. We cannot let this happen again.
So you'd go back to the Donbass?
We haven't any choice. We must do it.
There is now deadly fallout from this war in Russia too. Moscow says these blasts are from shooting down Ukrainian missiles fired across the border. 4 civilians were killed. That's nothing like the number dying in Ukraine every day, but it is a sign that not everything's going to Vladimir Putin's plan.
Since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v Wade, several US states have banned abortion in nearly all cases, and more have seriously limited access. It's forcing some women to travel across state lines to get the care they need. CNN's Adrian Broadus reports.
They come by car and by plane to this Bloomington, Minnesota clinic, opened for its access to transportation arteries connecting Minnesota with states banning abortion.
Some patients may fly, some patients may prefer to drive. And so being near the highways that we are and the airport in Bloomington really gives patients, the most options.
Now, Whole Woman's Health is one clinic bracing to treat more patients, with I-35 connecting it to 3 of the states with the most restrictive abortion laws, including Texas and South Dakota right next door. Planned Parenthood CEO Sarah States is also bracing for an influx.
We expect to see a minimum of 10 to 25% more people coming seeking abortion.
Can you guys handle the increase?
I don't know if we're going to be able to handle the increase. There is already a healthcare worker shortage, and we've been struggling with that since the beginning of the pandemic. That hasn't gone away.
And that worries Liz Van Heel.
I actually always thought I'd have 2 boys.
Who knows the challenges of seeking this type of health care, even before the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. 6 years ago, Van Heel says she and her husband went in for an ultrasound and left devastated.
It was Friday the 13th that my doctor told me the news that this baby was incompatible with life. And that's when I decided I wanted an abortion as soon as possible.
Van Heel says her unborn baby had a neural tube defect, meaning her baby's brain didn't fully develop.
And that diagnosis meant that I would either miscarry at any time or that moments after I gave birth, the baby would die. I knew that continuing to carry a baby that was not compatible with life was not going to be good for my mental health or my emotional health.
The Minneapolis mother, who later had a healthy child, is worried women like her will have an even tougher time getting an abortion.
That is worrisome. I would be honored to be a resource for anyone that needs it.
Planned Parenthood says it's hearing from people like Van Heel, offering to be a resource for those who live far from airports or don't have cars.
Someone reached out to me who owns a small plane, and she wants to organize a lot of her friends and others around the country who also have small planes and can land in rural parts of the country and can safely transport women to larger urban centers.
But even for people with transportation, Planned Parenthood expects appointments will be in short supply.
I do think we'll see more use of abortion pills by mail because appointments are going to be difficult to get.
The theatre world is mourning one of the most influential theatre directors of post-war Britain, Peter Brook, who's died aged 97. His early-stage career ranged from revitalising Shakespeare to Broadway musicals to ancient Indian epics. The BBC's Vincent Dowd looks back at his life.
Born in London in 1925, the young Peter Brook was an extraordinary wunderkind, director of productions at the Royal Opera House in London at just 22, and at 25 directing John Gielgud on stage in Shakespeare. His best-known film was Lord of the Flies.
It's a shell, a conch he called it. He used to blow it and then his mum would come.
Early on, Brook did direct commercial fare, such as the musicals House of Flowers and Irma la Douce on Broadway. But in London in 1964, his powerful staging of the Marasade by the German playwright Peter Weiss shocked some. Much later, Peter Brook said the theatre of the 1950s and 60s had needed shaking up.
There was a genuine reason to smash the shop windows of middle-class complacency. And the whole theatre was held in by all the worst bourgeois values. It was a theatre of comfort, blinding one to any form of reality that wasn't quite nice.
In 1970, A Midsummer Night's Dream, staged in a simple white set, showed Shakespeare could be done in radical new ways. But by now, Peter Brook was interested mainly in drama beyond Britain. By the mid-70s, he'd moved to Paris, setting up the International Centre for Theatre Research and running the Bouffe du Nord Theatre there. Asian drama fascinated him. He was praised for his staging of the Indian epic, the Mahabharata.
What's your name?
Vyasa.
What's your poem about?
It's the poetical history of mankind. At the end, you'll be someone else.
Some revered Peter Brook for the purity of his vision. Others thought his work at times dry and academic. But he was enormously influential on other theatre directors.
And that's all we've got time for tonight. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. as winter bugs take hold. First Up speaks to a school hiring relievers to relieve the relievers. So don't forget to tune into that one. Kei te hoki mai anō a pōpō whānau pō Māori.
RNZ News at 6:30. The Prime Minister hopes Australia is making progress on changing the contentious 501 deportation policy, but says it's not a simple issue. Immunologist Graham LeGros says while the Pfizer vaccine is not ideal for the new Omicron BA5 variant, it does help to keep up immunity levels. Some restaurant owners are furious. The Immigration Minister is criticising hospitality working conditions when they say many businesses are offering higher wages and more benefits. And the government's latest sanctions on Russia will see all imports of Russian gold banned. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.